The neon lights buzzed faintly outside of Sully's Roadhouse, a well-worn bar just outside of Austin, Texas, where weary travelers and blue-collar locals came to unwind. Malik Grayson, a 32-year-old Army veteran, stepped inside, hoping for nothing more than a quiet drink and a moment of peace after returning home from deployment. The air was thick with the scent of whiskey and fried food, the jukebox humming an old country tune in the corner. As he took a seat near the back, Malik ignored the glances from a few patrons. He was used to the feeling of being watched. His fatigues, still creased from the duffel bag he carried them in, seemed to draw unwanted attention. He had traded his combat boots for a pair of worn sneakers. A small act of comfort after months in uniform. He didn't come here to be noticed. But unfortunately, some men thrived on making others feel like outsiders. At the bar, a group of older men, grizzled, beer-bellied, and clad in faded leather jackets, huddled together, their voices booming over the chatter. Their jackets bore military patches, insignias of service from years past. And when they caught sight of Malik, their conversation shifted. One of them, a burly man with a gray beard and a permanent scowl, squinted in his direction. His name was Roy Buckner, a retired Marine who prided himself on spotting phony soldiers. Roy muttered something under his breath, and the men laughed, their glances sharpening into glares. Malik could feel the weight of their stares long before Roy pushed himself off the barstool and approached. The room quieted slightly, the energy shifting from casual banter to something more pointed. Roy stopped a few feet from Malik's table, arms crossed over his chest. "Nice uniform," he said, his voice thick with mockery. "Where'd you pick that up? A thrift store?" The men at the bar snickered. Malik didn't flinch. He had faced worse than barroom bullies. "It's mine," he said calmly, taking a sip of water. "Earned it," Roy scoffed. "That right? Funny, because I've seen real soldiers. And they don't wear sneakers with their fatigues. You trying to get free drinks? Or just sympathy?" Malik exhaled slowly. He had heard this all before, the unspoken assumption that someone like him, a black man, couldn't possibly have served with honor. His patience was razor thin. But he refused to let men like Roy dictate his evening. "I don't need free drinks. And I sure as hell don't need sympathy," Malik said evenly, locking eyes with Roy. But Roy wasn't done. He leaned in, his beer-scented breath thick in the air. "Then prove it. Show us your tags. Or admit you're a damn liar." Malik set his glass down with deliberate care, knowing this night had taken a turn he hadn't asked for. The room held its breath, waiting to see what he would do next. Malik held Roy's gaze, his jaw tightening just enough to show he wasn't afraid, but not so much that it gave away the irritation simmering beneath his skin. He had been trained for moments like this, not just in combat, but in self-control. He knew the weight of a misplaced reaction, how one wrong move could turn an ugly situation into something far worse. So, instead of rising to Roy's bait, he simply leaned back in his chair, measured and unshaken, fingers tapping lightly against the table. "I don't owe you proof of anything," he said, his voice even, unyielding. Roy's smirk faltered for a second, but pride wouldn't let him back down. His ego had been pricked, and he wasn't about to let a man half his age, especially one like Malik, dismiss him so easily. His nostrils flared as he stepped closer, his shadow falling over Malik's table like a storm cloud. "You hear that, boys?" Roy called over his shoulder, voice thick with amusement. "He doesn't owe his proof." The men at the bar chuckled, some nodding along, others egging him on with murmured encouragement. Malik could feel the shift in energy, the tightening of the air. This was more than just barroom banter now, it was a challenge. A test to see how far he could be pushed. Roy leaned in, his knuckles pressing against the worn wood of Malik's table. "You don't look like a soldier to me," he sneered, his voice dropping to something cold and pointed. "No boots, no dog tags, no discipline. You walk in here like you belong. But I don't think you do." Malik exhaled slowly through his nose, keeping his posture loose, unthreatening. "I served 3 tours overseas," he said, his voice still steady but carrying a quiet steel beneath it. "I don't need your approval to belong anywhere." For the first time, there was a crack in Roy's bravado. The men at the bar shifted, exchanging glances, uncertainty creeping into their expressions. But Roy wasn't done. He had come too far to back down now, and his frustration boiled over. With a sudden movement, he reached out, grabbing Malik's shirt collar in a tight fist. Then act like it, he snapped, pulling him slightly forward. The room gasped. Chairs scraped against the floor. The bartender's hand hovered near the phone, ready to call for help. But Malik didn't flinch. Before Roy could do more, Malik moved with the kind of precision that only came from years of training. In a single fluid motion, he twisted Roy's wrist, forcing him to release his grip, and used his own weight to flip him onto the table with a loud thud. Roy let out a strangled gasp, his bravado crumbling in an instant. The bar fell into stunned silence. Malik held Roy there, not with unnecessary force, but with just enough pressure to remind him of one thing. He had underestimated the wrong man. Malik could feel the weight of every eye in the bar pressing down on him, their whispers cutting through the silence like a blade. His pulse thundered in his ears. But his grip on Roy remained firm, steady, just enough pressure to send a message without crossing the line. Years of discipline told him to de-escalate, to avoid confrontation if possible. But years of experience also told him that men like Roy wouldn't stop until they were put in their place. Malik had spent too many years being second-guessed, having his service questioned, and his identity challenged. He had fought battles in places these men had only seen on the news. He had watched friends bleed out in deserts far from home. And now, here he was, back on American soil, facing a different kind of battlefield, one where the enemy wasn't armed with weapons, but with ignorance and hate. A deep breath, steady hands. His mind screamed at him to walk away, but his heart burned with something raw, something that had been building for years. How many times had he been told he didn't belong? How many times had he swallowed his anger just to keep the peace? No, not tonight. With a controlled release, Malik let go of Roy, stepping back as the older man stumbled to regain his footing. "You came at me," Malik said, his voice calm but sharp as a blade. "And I could have done a lot worse." The tension in the room was suffocating. Even Roy's own men hesitated, their confidence shaken after seeing their so-called leader taken down so effortlessly. Roy's face burned red with humiliation. But instead of backing down, he spat on the floor at Malik's feet. "You think this proves something?" he hissed. "You think you're better than me?" Malik's fists clenched at his sides. But he didn't take the bait. "I don't need to prove anything to you," he said, his voice unwavering. "My record speaks for itself. My service speaks for itself. You can question me all you want, but it doesn't change the truth." A murmur rippled through the bar. Some of the patrons who had been silent before now nodded in quiet agreement. The bartender, still gripping the phone, finally lowered it. Roy's men shifted awkwardly, the fight draining out of them. But Malik wasn't done. He turned, looking directly into the camera, speaking to the listeners beyond the screen. "If you've ever had to fight for your place, if you've ever been doubted for who you are or what you've done, hit that like button. Show the world that we stand together, that we won't let people like Roy define us." A beat of silence. Then, the clatter of chairs as the tension began to ease. But Malik knew this wasn't just about one night in a bar. This was about something bigger, a fight that didn't end with words or fists. A fight for respect. And he wasn't backing down. The flashing red and blue lights outside cast eerie shadows through the bar's windows as the doors swung open. Two officers stepped inside, their presence sending an immediate wave of tension through the room. Malik stood tall, his breathing controlled, while Roy, still nursing his bruised pride, pointed an accusing finger at him. "That's the guy," Roy bellowed, his voice dripping with manufactured outrage. "He attacked me, and he's impersonating a soldier. He's a fraud." The older officer, a burly man with a hardened face, turned his gaze to Malik, scrutinizing him from head to toe. "Sir, do you have any identification to confirm your military status?" His voice was neutral, but Malik could sense the weight of the moment. Malik nodded, his movements slow and deliberate, knowing how quickly these situations could spiral. "In my bag," he said calmly, gesturing toward the duffel at his feet. The female officer, younger but sharp-eyed, stepped forward and unzipped it, her fingers grazing over neatly folded fatigues and carefully stored medals. She pulled out his military ID, inspecting it under the dim light. Her expression shifted, just slightly, but enough for Malik to see she knew the truth. "It's legitimate," she announced, turning to her partner, Sergeant Malik Grayson, Army Ranger, 3 tours overseas. A hushed murmur spread through the bar. Roy's face twisted in confusion. Then anger. That can't be right, he growled. He's wearing sneakers. That ain't military standard. The female officer raised an unimpressed brow. And that's your proof? Sneakers? She turned to the bartender. Can you confirm what happened? The bartender, who had been silently observing, finally spoke up. I saw the whole thing. That guy, he jabbed a finger at Roy, went after the sergeant first. Grabbed him. Sergeant Grayson just defended himself. A chorus of nods followed. A man near the jukebox added, yeah, Roy was running his mouth, trying to start something, but the sergeant handled it without throwing a single punch, until Roy lunged at him. The older officer turned back to Roy, his expression now hard and unimpressed. So let me get this straight, you started a fight, lost, and now you're making false accusations? Roy opened his mouth, but no words came out. The reality of the situation was sinking in. His own people, his drinking buddies, his allies, were distancing themselves. The confidence he had walked in with was crumbling. False reports are a serious offense. The officer continued. And assault? That could land you in handcuffs. Malik said nothing, but inside, something shifted. He had been here before, painted as the villain when all he had done was exist in the wrong place at the wrong time. But this time, the truth wasn't just on his side, it was undeniable. And then, something unexpected happened. One of Roy's own men, a wiry guy named Bill, hesitated before stepping forward. His voice was quiet but clear. He's telling the truth. The entire room turned to him. Malik's pulse steadied. This was far from over. What do you think will happen next? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for the next part of the story. The sun hung low in the Texas sky, casting long, golden streaks across Malik Grayson's driveway as he wiped the grease from his hands. Working on his old pickup was therapeutic, something tangible he could fix. Unlike the deeper wounds left by battles fought both overseas and at home, the encounter at Sully's Roadhouse still lingered in his mind, not because of the confrontation itself, but because of what it represented. He had faced hostility before, been doubted, underestimated, but that night had been different. That night, the truth had been undeniable. And for once, people had seen it for what it was. The distant hum of an approaching motorcycle cut through his thoughts. Malik straightened, his eyes narrowing as the bike rolled onto the gravel. The rider, a wiry man in a faded leather jacket, pulled off his helmet, revealing a face Malik recognized immediately. Bill, one of Roy's crew. Malik tensed instinctively, his body still conditioned for conflict. Was this some pathetic attempt at payback? But Bill's posture wasn't aggressive. If anything, he looked uncomfortable, hesitant, as though he had been debating whether to even stop. He dismounted, stuffing his hands in his jacket pockets, shifting from foot to foot like a man carrying something heavier than himself. Malik, right? Bill's voice was quieter than before. Gone was the drunken bravado from the bar. Malik crossed his arms. That's me. What do you want? Bill exhaled sharply, rubbing the back of his neck. Look, I came to say I was wrong. He met Malik's gaze, his expression earnest, though laced with shame. About the other night, about everything. Malik said nothing, waiting. He had seen apologies before. Some real, some hollow. The weight of this one would reveal itself in time. Bill sighed. Roy, he's got a way of riling people up. He always talks about respect, about what it means to serve. But he doesn't. He don't really know what it means anymore. He's angry at the world. And I guess, in that moment, I let myself be just as blind as him. He looked down at his boots, scuffing the dirt. But seeing you handle yourself the way you did, you didn't lash out. Didn't lose control. That ain't easy. Man, I know it ain't. Malik studied him, searching for deception, but all he found was regret. Bill took a deep breath. I never served, but my old man did. He fought in Vietnam, came back home and wasn't the same. People didn't respect him, didn't see his sacrifices, and it made him bitter. I think maybe I started becoming like him without realizing it. But I don't want to be that man. He looked up, voice firm now. I don't want to be Roy. A long pause. Then, Malik nodded, his stance easing. Takes a lot to admit when you're wrong. Bill exhaled, relieved. So, we good? Malik smirked. That depends. You gonna keep standing in my driveway? Or you wanna help me fix this truck? Bill grinned, stepping forward. Change wasn't just about words, it was about action. Do you believe in second chances? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and hit subscribe for the next chapter. Malik watched as Bill hesitated for a moment before stepping forward, the tension in his body easing just enough to show that this wasn't just an empty apology. It was real, sincere, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something different. But as the two of them started working on the truck, trading occasional remarks about engines and rusted bolts, Malik couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Not yet. The bar fight, the accusations, even Bill's apology, it was all leading to something else. Something bigger. And then, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, his phone buzzed in his pocket. A message. Unknown number. You should have stayed in your place. Malik stiffened, his fingers tightening around the phone. His instincts kicked in instantly. Scanning his surroundings, the hum of cicadas, the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. Nothing seemed out of place. But the message was a warning, a threat, and he had a damn good guess where it came from. Bill noticed the change in Malik's expression. Something wrong? Malik exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay calm. Yeah, he muttered. Looks like Roy isn't done after all. Bill's face paled slightly. Roy? Malik, listen, I knew he was mad. But, mad? Malik let out a short, humorless laugh. Bill, your friend tried to ruin my life because his ego couldn't handle being wrong. And now he's making sure I know he's not finished. A beat of silence stretched between them. Bill swallowed hard. I didn't sign up for this. You never do, Malik said, slipping his phone into his pocket. But it finds you anyway. For a moment, Malik considered letting it go, letting Roy stew in his own bitterness until it ate him alive. But that wasn't how things worked with men like him. Roy wasn't just angry, he was dangerous. The kind of man who couldn't accept a loss. Who would rather burn the whole damn world down before admitting he was wrong? And Malik knew, deep down, that this wasn't the last time he'd hear from him. Then, almost as if fate had decided to prove him right, headlights flared at the edge of the driveway. A truck, big, old, and familiar. The same damn truck Roy had pulled up in at Sully's Roadhouse. Bill turned, his face draining of color. Oh, hell. The truck idled for a moment, just sitting there, watching. Then the engine revved, tires kicking up gravel as it peeled away into the night. Malik exhaled slowly, his muscles coiled, his mind racing. This wasn't over. Roy wasn't just looking for revenge, he was planning something. And if Malik had learned anything from his years in combat, it was that the worst enemy wasn't the one who struck first. It was the one who came back when you least expected it. What do you think Roy is planning? Drop your theories in the comments. And stay tuned, this fight isn't over. The night air was thick with tension. But Malik Grayson didn't move. He stood at the edge of his driveway, watching the tail lights of Roy's truck fade into the darkness, the weight of the moment pressing against his chest like a familiar burden. He had seen this before, men like Roy, so consumed by their own bitterness that they'd rather self-destruct than accept change. Malik had faced enemies on foreign soil. But the battle against ignorance wasn't fought with weapons. It was fought in moments like these. In bars, in driveways, in the quiet spaces where resentment festered and fear turned to anger. Bill shifted beside him, rubbing his hands together anxiously. Malik, he's not gonna let this go. Malik sighed, his breath steady despite the storm brewing in his mind. I know. And he did. Roy wasn't done. But the thing about men like Roy? They always fell under the weight of their own hate. Malik had learned long ago that the strongest man wasn't the one who fought the hardest. It was the one who knew when to walk away, when to let the battle come to them, and when to rise to meet it. Days passed, then a week, and then, the news came. Roy Buckner had been arrested. Assault, drunk and disorderly, attempted arson. Malik stared at the headline. The grainy mugshot of Roy's defeated face staring back at him. The man had finally spiraled. And now, he would answer for it. It wasn't Malik's victory, it never had been. This wasn't a fight he needed to win. Roy had been fighting himself all along. And yet, Malik didn't feel triumph, just a strange, quiet sense of sadness. Because the truth was, Roy had a choice. He had a chance to be better. Just like Bill. But instead, he had clung to his anger. Let it eat him alive until it consumed everything in its path, including himself. Malik stood in his driveway that evening, staring at the same horizon Roy had once disappeared into. And he made a choice of his own. To keep pushing forward. To live his life with dignity. Knowing that every battle he fought with honor meant something. He couldn't save everyone, some people refused to be saved. But for every Roy, there was a Bill. And if he could change even one mind, shift even one perspective, then the fight was worth it. Because the real victory wasn't in winning a fight. It was in refusing to become what you fought against. So if you've ever been doubted, if you've ever been told you don't belong, remember this. Strength isn't just about what you can do. It's about who you choose to be. And if you believe in standing strong in the face of adversity, if you believe in integrity over ignorance, hit that like button. Drop a comment. And follow this channel for more powerful stories. Because this is just the beginning.